Smile, Luna, Elena whispered, her fingers digging painfully into Luna's arm, her voice a saccharine hiss masked by the wedding march. You wouldn't want to ruin our perfect day, would you? Not when David looked so happy to finally have the right sister. Luna stared ahead, her heart a hollow, rhythmic ache in her chest. She watched the man she thought was her destined mate. The man who had kissed her under the waning moon just a season ago. Stand at the altar, his eyes locked not on her, but on the triumphant bride beside her. I said smile, Elena repeated, her grip tightening until Luna was certain there would be bruises. I am smiling, Luna replied, her voice deadened as the doors to the sanctuary suddenly groaned open. The cathedral was suffocatingly warm, heavy with the scent of lilies and the hushed, expectant murmurs of the Silver Pine pack. Every seat was filled. The elite of their society had gathered to witness the union of the future Alpha, David to Elena, the vibrant, ambitious daughter of the Beta line. And standing in the shadow of the intricately carved pillars, near enough to hear every breath but far enough to be a ghost, was Luna. Elena had insisted Luna be her maid of honor. It was presented to the pack as a touching display of sisterly unity. To Luna, it was a finely crafted blade, twisted slowly. I want you in the front row, Elena had said days before, her eyes gleaming with a victory that went beyond the political match. I want you to see exactly what you lost, what was never really yours. Luna adjusted the restrictive collar of her pale blue dress, a color chosen by Elena because it washed her out. She kept her gaze fixed on the stained glass above the altar, tracing the jagged lines of colored glass to avoid looking at the figures below. The air was thick with the scent of the pack, but above it all, she could smell the distinct, sharp scent of pine and rain. David, her mate, or he should have been. The bond between them had sparked months ago, an undeniable pull that left her breathless and terrified. They had shared whispered promises, stolen moments near the boundary line. He had called her his anchor. Yet, when the time came to formally declare their mating before the pack elders, David had hesitated. Then, Elena had stepped in. Elena, with her confident laugh and her strategic mind. Elena, who knew exactly what the ambitious young Alpha needed to solidify his position. The political pressure had been immense, yes, but Luna knew the truth. David hadn't been forced. He had chosen. He had chosen power and the right image over the quiet, steadfast bond they shared. The rejection hadn't been spoken aloud in front of the pack, but the silence had been deafening. Do you, David of the Silver Pine, take Elena to be your Luna, your partner in leadership and life? The elder's voice boomed, echoing against the stone walls. Luna forced her eyes down. David stood tall, his dark hair neatly styled, his jaw set. He looked every bit the strong leader the pack demanded, but his hands were clenched tightly at his sides. For a fraction of a second, his gaze flicked past Elena's radiant, triumphant face. It bypassed the elders and the gathered pack members. His eyes found Luna. In that fleeting moment, she saw a storm of conflict in his gray eyes. Regret, fear, perhaps even a desperate apology. It was a look that confirmed everything and changed nothing. He was still standing there. He was still going through with it. Luna didn't offer him forgiveness. She offered him nothing. She hardened her expression, forcing her face into a mask of polite indifference. If she was to be the sacrificial lamb on the altar of his ambition, she would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her bleed. Elena shifted slightly, intentionally blocking David's line of sight to her sister. She practically vibrated with impatient energy. I do, David said. His voice was steady, resonant. The words felt like physical blows. A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. Elena's smile widened, sharp and predatory. "And do you, Elena?" the elder began, but his words were suddenly drowned out by a sound that made the very foundations of the cathedral tremble. It wasn't an explosion, but a low, reverberating hum that seemed to emanate from the earth itself. The heavy oak doors at the back of the cathedral, which had been securely shut to keep the winter chill at bay, groaned in protest. The murmurs of the crowd turned into alarmed whispers. The elder paused, frowning down the aisle. Several enforcers near the back shifted uneasily, hands drifting toward the concealed weapons they carried even on sacred ground. Then, the doors blew open. They didn't just swing wide. They slammed against the stone walls with a force that sent a shower of dust drifting down from the rafters. The immediate influx of freezing air extinguished the candles nearest the entrance in a flurry of smoke. Silence descended. Total, absolute silence. Silhouetted in the doorway stood a figure. He was impossibly tall, his presence so commanding that it seemed to suck the oxygen from the room. He wore a dark, tailored suit that looked entirely out of place on a frame that suggested raw, uncoiled violence. He stepped inside. The scent hit them a moment later. It wasn't the familiar, earthy scent of a local wolf. It was overwhelming. It smelled of ozone, crackling lightning, and ancient, untamed power. It was the scent of a king. A wave of instinctual submission rippled through the crowd. Several pack members inadvertently lowered their heads. Even David, standing at the altar, seemed to pale, his posture rigid. The stranger didn't look at the alpha. He didn't look at the bride, whose face had twisted from triumph to shocked indignation. His gaze swept the room with terrifying precision, dismissing the hundreds of faces in an instant. Then, his eyes stopped. They locked onto the pale blue dress standing in the shadows by the pillar. Luna felt a jolt run through her spine, entirely different from the agonizing pull she had felt with David. This was electric. It was terrifying. The stranger began to walk down the aisle. His footsteps were silent on the stone, but every eye tracked his slow, deliberate progression. The enforcers, usually quick to intercept any threat, remained frozen, recognizing a power that vastly outmatched their own. He reached the front of the cathedral, stopping just short of the altar where David and Elena stood frozen. But he still didn't look at them. He turned slowly, facing the pillar where Luna stood. The silence in the cathedral was so profound that Luna could hear her own frantic heartbeat. "You are difficult to find," he said. His voice was low, gravelly, and carried to the furthest corners of the room without effort. Luna opened her mouth, but no words came. Who was this man? Why was he looking at her like he owned the ground she stood on? David finally found his voice, stepping forward, an attempt at asserting dominance that fell painfully flat. "Excuse me. This is a private ceremony. You are trespassing on Silver Pine territory." The stranger finally glanced at David. It was a look of such utter dismissal that David actually took a half-step back. "I care nothing for your territory," the stranger said softly, the quiet tone more threatening than a shout. "I am here for what is mine." He turned back to Luna, extending a large, scarred hand. "Come," the Alpha King commanded. The silence stretching across the cathedral was a physical weight, heavy and suffocating. The scarred, calloused hand offered to Luna hung in the air between them, steady as a stone pillar. It was a lifeline forged in thunder and ozone. "Ah, guards!" Elena's voice shattered the quiet, shrill and trembling with unadulterated fury. She snatched the delicate lace veil from her face, her carefully curated image of the blushing bride instantly dissolving into a mask of pure, venomous rage. "Remove this intruder at once. This is my wedding." Not a single enforcer moved. The men who were sworn to lay down their lives for the Silver Pine Pack remained rooted to the polished marble floor. Their heads were bowed, their eyes averted, trapped in the gravitational pull of an apex predator whose mere presence demanded total submission. David's face flushed a deep, humiliating crimson. He stepped down from the altar, placing himself between the stranger and Luna, though he wisely kept a distance of several feet. His chest puffed out as he attempted to draw upon the authority of his bloodline. "You have no jurisdiction here," David warned, though the slight tremor in his voice betrayed his bravado. "She is a sworn member of my pack. You cannot simply walk in and issue commands." The Alpha King did not raise his voice. He did not shift his stance. He simply turned his terrifying gaze toward David, and the temperature in the room seemed to plummet another 10 degrees. "Your pack?" the stranger murmured, the deep timbre of his voice vibrating through the soles of Luna's shoes. "You speak of loyalty and belonging, yet you stand at an altar with a woman of ambition, while the other half of your soul bleeds in the shadows. You discarded her for political convenience. She is no longer yours to claim, boy." The word boy cracked like a whip. David recoiled as if physically struck, his jaw clenching, but he could find no words to counter the brutal truth. Elena practically threw herself down the altar steps, her heavy satin gown dragging behind her. She pointed a trembling, manicured finger at Luna. "She set this up. She couldn't stand losing, so she hired some rogue to ruin my day. Luna, tell them to throw him out before I have you exiled." Luna barely heard her sister. Her entire universe had narrowed down to the massive hand extended toward her. She looked at Kaelin's hand, noting the faint silver scars that crisscrossed the knuckles, the marks of a man who fought his own battles. Then she looked past the stranger, meeting David's eyes. There it was again, the agonizing regret. The silent plea for her to stay, to endure the humiliation so he could have both his power and his proximity to her. It was the ultimate selfishness. For the first time in months, the fog of heartbreak cleared from Luna's mind, replaced by a crystalline, piercing clarity. If she stayed, she would be the tragic, discarded sister forever. She would be forced to bow to Elena, forced to watch David raise children that should have been hers. She would wither away in the shadow of their stolen happiness. She looked back at the stranger. He was an unknown, a terrifying force of nature capable of bringing an entire pack to its knees without lifting a finger. But in his dark, stormy eyes, she saw something she had never seen in David's. Absolute, unwavering certainty. Luna took a deep breath, the scent of sharp pine fading, replaced entirely by the intoxicating aroma of ozone and rain. Slowly, deliberately, she lifted her arm. A collective gasp echoed through the massive stone sanctuary as Luna's delicate fingers rested against his wide palm. The moment their skin made contact, a violent, electric shockwave rippled up Luna's arm. It wasn't the warm, comfortable pull she had shared with David. This was a roaring inferno, a sudden, blinding recognition that knocked the breath from her lungs. The king's hand closed around hers, his grip surprisingly gentle, yet entirely inescapable. "No," David shouted, taking a frantic step forward, his alpha aura flaring in a desperate final attempt to stop her. The king didn't even look back. He merely released a low, rumbling growl that rattled the stained glass windows in their lead casings. David fell to his knees, clutching his chest as the oppressive wave of dominance crushed his resistance into dust. Elena screamed something completely unintelligible, thrashing against her mother, who had rushed forward to hold her back. The picture-perfect wedding had descended into absolute ruin. "Walk with me," the king commanded softly, meant only for Luna's ears. She didn't look back. With her hand securely enveloped in his, Luna turned her back on her sister, on the boy who had broken her heart, and on the only home she had ever known. She matched the stranger's slow, deliberate pace, walking back down the aisle of the cathedral. The heavy oak doors stood wide open, framing the gray winter sky. As they crossed the threshold, stepping out into the biting cold, Luna felt a profound, terrifying sense of freedom wash over her. She was leaving everything behind, stepping into the void with a king. The transition from the stifling, perfume-choked air of the cathedral to the biting, crisp winter afternoon was jarring. Luna stumbled slightly as her heels hit the cobblestone path outside the sanctuary, her body trembling violently from a potent cocktail of adrenaline, shock, and the freezing temperature. Instantly, a heavy, wool-lined overcoat was draped over her shivering shoulders. It swallowed her petite frame entirely, smelling intensely of the storm that seemed to follow the Alpha King. She looked up, her breath pluming in the cold air, to see him adjusting the collar around her neck with a surprising, deft gentleness. "The shock will pass," he said quietly, his gaze scanning the courtyard. Waiting at the base of the cathedral steps was a fleet of 3 sleek, armored black SUVs. Standing at attention beside them were 4 men and 2 women, all dressed in dark tactical suits. They possessed the same quiet, lethal stillness as their king. None of them looked toward the open doors of the church. Their eyes were trained strictly on the perimeter, treating the Silver Pine territory not as a sanctuary, but as a hostile war zone. The king guided her toward the center vehicle. One of the guards, a tall woman with a jagged scar across her jawline, opened the rear door without a word, bowing her head slightly as Luna approached. "Get in," the king instructed. Luna hesitated for a fraction of a second, her hand resting on the doorframe. The reality of what she had just done was crashing down on her. She had just defected from her pack. In the eyes of the elders, she was now an exile, a rogue. She looked over her shoulder, expecting to see David charging out of the church, demanding she return. But the heavy oak doors remained empty. The only sound was the distant, muffled sobbing of her sister echoing from within the stone walls. With a tight nod, Luna slid into the luxurious leather interior of the SUV. The king slid in beside her, filling the space with his immense frame and that overwhelming, crackling aura. The door shut with a heavy, final thud, cutting off the sounds of the outside world completely. The driver didn't wait for a command. The convoy accelerated smoothly, tires crunching over the frost-covered gravel as they sped away from the cathedral, away from the packlands, and toward the northern border. For the first 20 minutes, silence reigned in the cabin. Luna stared out the tinted window, watching the familiar pine forests blur past. She had grown up running through those woods, tracing the border lines, dreaming of a future that had just been violently erased. A solitary tear broke free, tracking a hot path down her cheek. She hastily wiped it away, embarrassed by her weakness in front of this terrifying stranger. "You mourn a man who was unworthy of your grief." His voice broke the silence, deep and resonant in the confined space. Luna turned to look at him. He was staring straight ahead, his profile sharp and aristocratic, carved from granite. "I mourn the life I thought I was supposed to have," she corrected softly, finding a sliver of courage. "I mourn the sister I thought loved me. and I don't even know the name of the man who just kidnapped me." The corner of his mouth twitched, the ghost of a smirk. "I did not kidnap you. I offered my hand. You chose to take it. And my name is Kalen." Kalen. The name resonated in her mind, carrying the weight of ancient history. He was the sovereign of the northern reaches, a territory steeped in myth and known for producing the most formidable warriors on the continent. "Why?" Luna asked, clutching the lapels of his massive coat tighter around herself. "Why come to a Beta-line wedding in a mid-tier pack? How did you even know I was there?" Kalen finally turned his head to look at her. The intensity in his gray eyes was staggering. "Because the bond of true mates is not restricted by territory lines or pack politics." When he stood at that altar and spoke his vows to another, the agony of your soul tearing from his echoed across the continent. Luna flinched, the memory of David saying, "I do," flashing behind her eyes like a strobe light. "I felt it," Kalen continued, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. "A true mate's rejection is a wound to the earth itself. I followed the fracture. I came to exact justice on the fool who dared to break what was meant to be whole." Luna's heart pounded against her ribs. "We aren't mates, you and I. I would have known. You were blinded by a childhood bond, a false resonance engineered by proximity and convenience." Kalen stated matter-of-factly. "David was a boy you grew up with. A comfortable illusion. What you felt when you touched my hand back there? Tell me it was an illusion." Luna swallowed hard, unable to lie. The electric fire that had raced up her arm was still humming beneath her skin. It terrified her. She had just survived the destruction of one bond. She was in no condition to be shackled by another, even one decreed by fate. "I have nothing left to give," Luna whispered, her voice trembling. "If you brought me here expecting a willing queen to warm your bed and rule your lands, you have wasted your time, King Kalen." "I am broken." Kalen leaned back against the leather seat, his eyes never leaving hers. There was no pity in his gaze, only a profound, terrifying respect. "I did not come to claim a fragile prisoner to mold into a queen," Kalen said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "I came to retrieve a survivor. You will have your time to heal, Luna. But make no mistake, you are not broken. You are simply forging a new blade." The convoy drove for hours, devouring the miles as the soft, rolling hills of the southern territories gave way to a much harsher, unforgiving landscape. Inside the heavy, armored SUV, the silence had stretched from tense to a strange, suspended state of exhaustion. Luna sat pressed against the furthest edge of her door, the massive wool coat still swallowed around her frame. She watched the world outside her window transition from twilight into deep, inky blackness. The tall, familiar pines of her youth were replaced by towering, ancient spruces heavily laden with snow. The road steepened, winding through jagged mountain passes, where sheer drops fell away into nothingness just inches from the tires. Her eyelids grew heavy, betraying her. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the cathedral doors and the initial shock of the escape was rapidly draining from her system, leaving behind a hollow, aching fatigue. She fought the urge to sleep, terrified of closing her eyes and waking up to find this had all been a hallucination. That she was still standing in the shadows of the church, watching David kiss her sister. "You can sleep," Kalen said. His voice startled her, pulling her gaze away from the frosted glass. He had barely moved since they left the silver pine borders. He sat with a stillness that was unnerving, an apex predator at total rest. Yet despite the distance between them on the leather seat, She could feel the heat radiating from his massive frame, a comforting hearth fire against the icy chill of the glass. "I'm fine," Luna lied, her voice raspy. She straightened her spine, forcing herself to sit up perfectly straight. It was a habit drilled into her by her mother, a beta who valued appearance and etiquette above all else. Never show weakness, Luna. Leave that to the alpha bloodlines to exploit. Kalen shifted slightly, turning his broad shoulders toward her. In the dim ambient lighting of the vehicle's cabin, his eyes caught the faint glow of the dashboard. They were the color of a stormy sea, swirling with a quiet, analytical intelligence. "You are operating on instinct and shock," Kalen observed, his tone devoid of judgment, presenting it merely as a tactical fact. "Your nervous system has been subjected to a severing of a perceived bond, public humiliation, and a sudden geographic relocation. Denying your exhaustion serves no tactical purpose." Luna blinked, momentarily thrown off balance by his clinical, almost military assessment of her emotional devastation. David would have offered platitudes. He would have told her everything was going to be fine while simultaneously expecting her to comfort him for his own guilt. "If I sleep," Luna murmured, staring down at her hands, which were still trembling faintly, "I might wake up and realize what I've just done. I just declared war between our packs. David is an alpha. He won't let this go. It's an insult to his pride. David is a boy playing at leadership." Kalen corrected smoothly, the deep rumble of his chest vibrating through the confined space. "An alpha does not stand by while his mate is marginalized. An alpha does not sacrifice his soul for a political alliance. Let him perceive this as an insult. Let him view it as an act of war. The northern reaches have stood against far greater threats than a wounded southern ego." The absolute certainty in his voice sent a strange shiver down Luna's spine that had nothing to do with the cold. It was a staggering level of confidence. He wasn't posturing. He was simply stating a reality he believed to his core. "You don't know him," Luna whispered, defensive habit flaring up despite everything. "He has the elders' backing. He has my sister's ambition driving him. They will demand you return me." "And what do you want?" Kalen asked, cutting through her anxious rambling with a single, sharp question. Luna froze. It was such a simple question, yet it felt entirely foreign. For the past year, everything she had done was about what David needed, what Elena wanted, what the pack required of her. No one had asked what she wanted. "I don't want to go back," she admitted, the words tasting like copper and freedom on her tongue. Or then you will not," Kalen replied simply, as if he were discussing the weather. Before Luna could process the finality of his statement, the SUV began to slow. She looked out the windshield. Rising out of the swirling snow and darkness were massive, wrought-iron gates, flanked by towering stone walls that seemed to grow directly out of the mountain rock. High above, torches burned in iron sconces, casting flickering, violent shadows across the snow. As the convoy approached, the heavy gates ground open with a metallic shriek that echoed off the mountainsides. They drove into a vast courtyard, and for the first time, Luna saw the true scale of her new reality. Blackwood Keep was a fortress of dark stone and brutalist architecture, beautiful in its lethal, uncompromising strength. It was nothing like the elegant, fragile mansions of the South. This was a place built to withstand the end of the world. The vehicles rolled to a halt. Kalen looked at her, the ghost of a softer expression softening the hard planes of his face. "Welcome to the North, Luna." The interior of Blackwood Keep was a study in contrasts. The exterior promised cold brutality, But stepping through the heavy oak double doors, Luna was met with a wave of intense, dry heat. Massive hearths burned violently in the entrance hall, their flames reflecting off polished dark wood and ancient woven tapestries that depicted wolves the size of bears hunting under starry skies. It was intimidating, yet undeniably warm. The silence here was different from the cathedral. It wasn't the silence of held breath and judgment, but the quiet hum of a well-oiled machine. Pact members moved through the corridors with purposeful strides, offering sharp, respectful bows to their king before continuing on their way. No one stared at her. No one whispered behind their hands. The discipline was absolute. Kaelin had handed her off to a stern-faced, gray-haired woman named Mora the moment they entered the foyer. "Mora will show you to your quarters," Kaelin had said, his tone shifting back to the commanding sovereign. He hadn't touched her since the car, a physical distance that Luna found herself simultaneously grateful for and inexplicably missing. "I have matters to attend to regarding our border security. Rest, eat. The doors are not locked." With those final words, he had turned and vanished down a shadowy corridor, followed by two of his tactical guards. Now, Luna stood in the center of the quarters Mora had led her to, her arms wrapped tightly around her waist. She had expected a guest room. Perhaps a small functional space meant for a political hostage. Instead, she was standing in a sprawling suite that took up the entire western corner of the keep. Heavy velvet curtains framed floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the jagged peaks of the mountains. A massive four-poster bed draped in thick furs dominated the space. But there was also a sitting area with plush leather armchairs, a roaring fireplace, and an adjoining bathing chamber that smelled faintly of cedar and sage. It was the grandest room she had ever been in. Growing up, Elena had always commanded the largest bedrooms, the finest clothes. Luna had naturally gravitated toward the smaller, quieter spaces, molding herself to fit the cracks her sister left behind. Being placed in the center of this sheer opulence felt like a mistake. "Are the fires to your liking, my lady?" Mora asked, her voice raspy but surprisingly gentle. She was laying out a thick, soft nightgown on the edge of the bed. "Yes, it's perfect. Thank you," Luna stammered, still clutching Kaelin's oversized coat around her shoulders like a shield. "But I think there's been a misunderstanding. I don't need a room this large. A smaller guest room would be fine." Mora paused, turning to look at Luna with a pair of sharp, assessing brown eyes. For a moment, the older woman simply studied the trembling, exhausted girl wrapped in her alpha's coat. "There is no misunderstanding," Mora said softly, moving closer. "These are the alpha's adjoining chambers. They have stood empty for a decade. You are the king's mate. You belong nowhere else but at the pinnacle of this keep." Luna flinched at the word mate. "We aren't—" "I didn't agree to that. I just needed to leave the South. The bond does not ask for written consent, child," Mora replied, a faint, knowing smile touching her weathered lips. "It simply is. But do not fear. Our king is a man of profound patience. He will not force a flower to bloom before the frost has thawed." Mora stepped forward and gently grasped the lapels of Kaelin's coat. Luna hesitated, but allowed the older woman to slide the heavy wool from her shoulders. The sudden loss of his scent, that sharp ozone and rain, made Luna feel entirely exposed, her pale blue bridesmaid dress looking utterly ridiculous and flimsy against the backdrop of the rugged northern keep. "A bath has been drawn. There is warm food on the table," Mora instructed, pointing to a silver tray resting near the fire. "I will leave you to your peace." When the heavy wooden door clicked shut, Luna was finally alone. The silence pressed in on her. But for the first time all day, she didn't feel the urge to cry. She felt a strange, terrifying sense of safety. She walked over to the silver tray. There was a bowl of hearty stew, fresh bread, and a cup of steaming tea. She ate mechanically at first, but the rich, savory flavors quickly awakened a hunger she hadn't realized she was harboring. After eating, she stripped off the pale blue dress. She let the hateful fabric pool on the stone floor, a discarded skin of her old life. She stepped into the steaming bath, letting the hot water scorch away the chill of the journey and the lingering phantom touches of her sister's cruel grip. Hours later, dressed in the soft nightgown, Luna sat in the leather chair by the fire, staring into the flames. She was a rogue now, an exile, the woman who had ruined the Silver Pine wedding. A soft, heavy knock at the door broke her reverie. Luna stiffened. "Come in," she called out, her voice steadier than she felt. The door opened slowly, and Kalen stepped into the threshold. He had changed out of his formal suit, now wearing simple dark trousers and a loose-fitting black shirt that clung to the heavy musculature of his chest. He stopped at the doorway, making no move to enter her space further. In his hand, he held a piece of heavy parchment, the wax seal broken. His jaw was locked tight, the muscles jumping beneath his skin, and the scent of ozone rolling off him was sharp with tightly controlled aggression. "I told you he would view it as an act of war," Kalen said quietly, his gray eyes pinning her to the chair. "A missive from the South. Alpha David has officially demanded the immediate return of his stolen property, or he will rally the Southern alliances to march on our borders." The heavy parchment seemed almost fragile in Kalen's massive, scarred hand. The broken wax seal, stamped with the silver pine tree of the Southern Territories, caught the flickering light of the hearth. Luna stared at the document, the air in her lungs suddenly turning to ice despite the roaring fire. "Stolen property?" Luna repeated, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. A tremor began in her hands, slowly working its way up her arms. For 22 years, she had been a daughter of the Silver Pine Pack. She knew the military strength of the South, the extensive web of alliances her father and David's father had spent decades weaving. They were a formidable force, built on treaties, wealth, and overwhelming numbers. "He means it," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the crackle of the burning logs. "David doesn't make idle threats. If his pride is wounded, he will retaliate. He has the backing of the Riverbend and Oakhaven packs. If they march on the north—" "Let them march," Kalen interrupted. His voice was a low, resonant rumble that carried not a single ounce of anxiety. He stepped fully into the room, tossing the crumpled missive onto the small stone table between the armchairs. Luna stood up, the soft fabric of the nightgown pooling around her ankles. "You don't understand. This isn't just about David. This is Elena. My sister is relentless. She won't allow the insult of her ruined wedding to go unpunished. They will bring an army to your gates, Kalen. Innocent people in your pack will die because you intervened for me." The crushing weight of guilt settled heavily on her chest. She had wanted to escape her pain, to flee the humiliation of the cathedral. But she had never intended to ignite a continental war. "I should go back," she said, the words tearing at her own heart. "I can explain that I left of my own free will. I can renounce my citizenship officially. If I surrender myself to the border guard, they will have no cause to attack you." Kalen moved with a sudden, predatory speed that belied his massive size. Before Luna could take a step toward the door, he was standing directly in front of her. The scent of ozone and impending rain wrapped around her, intense and grounding. "Look at me," he commanded softly. Luna dragged her gaze up, meeting those turbulent gray eyes. "You are not a piece on a chessboard to be traded for temporary peace," Kalen said, his gaze locking onto hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "And you vastly overestimate the courage of Southern boys who play at being kings. David relies on alliances because he lacks the strength to stand alone. He fights with treaties. We fight with tooth and steel." He reached out, his knuckles brushing lightly against the fabric of her sleeve, careful not to cross the boundary of her skin. "To return you to them would be a concession of my own weakness," Kalen continued, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. "It would tell the world that the Northern King yields to the tantrums of a disgraced alpha. But more importantly, Luna, it would mean handing you back to the very people who broke your spirit. I did not cross a continent to fetch you, only to hand you back to your tormentors. But the war, there will be no war," Kalen stated with absolute, chilling certainty. "Because wars require two equal sides. What David proposes is a slaughter. He just does not yet realize he is the lamb." He turned away from her, picking up the heavy parchment from the table. Without a second glance, he tossed the missive directly into the roaring fire. The thick paper curled, blackened, and burst into bright orange flames. "Rest, Luna," Kalen said, watching the ashes drift up the chimney. "Tomorrow, you will see exactly what kind of pack you have joined, and you will understand why the wolves of the Silver Pine should fear the winter." He did not wait for a response. He walked to the heavy oak door, pausing only for a fraction of a second in the doorway before disappearing into the shadowed corridor, leaving Luna alone with the dying embers of her past. The morning light filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows was blindingly white, reflecting off the freshly fallen snow on the jagged peaks surrounding Blackwood Keep. Luna woke to the sound of a soft, rhythmic tapping at her door. She sat up, pulling the heavy furs tightly around her shoulders. For a disorienting second, she expected to see the pale, floral wallpaper of her childhood bedroom in the south. Instead, the brutalist stone architecture of the king's chambers greeted her, a stark reminder of her new reality. "Enter," she called out, her voice raspy from sleep. The door opened to reveal Mora, carrying a large bundle of dark fabrics. Behind her, two younger female pack members carried a tray laden with steaming meats, sharp cheeses, and dark, crusty bread. "Good morning, my lady," Mora said, offering a respectful nod as the younger women quickly set the food by the fire and departed without a word. "The king has requested your presence in the Great Hall. The War Council convenes in an hour." Luna's stomach plummeted. The War Council. Kalen's dismissal of David's threat the night before had been comforting, but the reality of a council meeting meant preparations for violence were actively underway. "I don't have anything appropriate to wear," Luna murmured, looking down at the delicate cotton nightgown. Her pale blue bridesmaid dress lay in a heap in the corner, a ruined relic. Mora smiled, a grim, knowing expression. "The North provides for its own." She unrolled the bundle on the edge of the bed. It wasn't the restrictive, tailored silk or chiffon favored by Southern nobility. It was a stunning ensemble crafted for survival and authority. There were thick, tailored trousers of a deep charcoal wool, a high-collared tunic of spun silver thread, and a magnificent, sweeping cloak lined with dense, black wolf fur. These belonged to the king's mother, Mora explained softly, running a weathered hand over the silver tunic. She was a fierce woman, She would have approved of the fire in your eyes when you walked away from the altar. It took Luna 20 minutes to dress. The garments were heavier than anything she was accustomed to, but they felt like armor. When she clasped the heavy silver pin at the throat of the cloak, she looked at herself in the tall, oxidized mirror. The fragile, heartbroken girl in the blue dress was gone. Staring back at her was a woman forged in shadows and frost. Mora led her through the labyrinthine corridors of the keep. The atmosphere was vastly different from the quiet hum of the previous night. The air buzzed with a tightly coiled, aggressive energy. Heavily armed enforcers moved with rapid precision, their faces painted with grim determination. They reached a massive set of iron-wrought doors. 2 guards standing at attention immediately hauled them open, the heavy metal groaning in protest. The great hall was cavernous, illuminated by dozens of massive iron chandeliers. At the center of the room was a vast, circular table, carved from a single piece of ancient obsidian. Standing around it were a dozen of the most intimidating individuals Luna had ever seen, their bodies crisscrossed with scars, their eyes sharp and assessing. At the head of the table stood Kalen. He looked up as she entered, and the entire room fell dead silent. The generals and tacticians turned as one, their gazes fixing on Luna. She fought the urge to shrink back under the weight of their scrutiny. "Never show weakness," her mother's voice whispered in her mind. She lifted her chin, meeting the gaze of the scarred woman from the SUV, who offered a brief, respectful dip of her head. Kalen stepped away from the table, closing the distance between them. In the stark morning light, he looked even more imposing, a sovereign entirely in his element. He did not ask if she had slept well. He did not offer gentle platitudes. He extended his hand toward her, palm up. "Come, Luna," Kalen said, his voice echoing in the silent hall. "It is time you met the men and women who will march the Southern alliances into the sea." Luna hesitated for only a heartbeat before placing her hand in his. The familiar shock of electricity coursed up her arm, settling deep in her chest. As he led her toward the obsidian table, the northern generals parted, making space for her at the king's right side. For the first time in her life, she wasn't standing in the shadows. She was standing at the vanguard. The great hall was a symphony of quiet, calculated lethality. As Luna took her place at Kalen's right hand, she looked down at the massive obsidian table. It was not merely a piece of furniture. It was a sprawling, 3-dimensional map of the continent, carved with painstaking detail. Miniature banners of silver, gold, and crimson marked the positions of various packs. Right now, a cluster of silver and gold banners, David's coalition, was gathered aggressively near the southern base of the jagged peaks. "Report," Kalen commanded, his voice a low rumble that instantly silenced the faint murmurs in the room. A tall man with a braided beard and a patch over his left eye stepped forward. He traced a scarred finger along a deep groove in the stone map. "Scouts confirm the Alpha of Silver Pine has mobilized his vanguard. They are currently staging at the mouth of the Whispering Pass. They have the numbers they promised, 3,000 enforcers from the Riverbend and Oakhaven packs. However, they are moving slowly. Their supply trains are heavy. They intend to establish a forward operating base at the summit before the next blizzard." Another general added, a woman whose arms were covered in intricate runic tattoos. "If they secure the summit, they will have the high ground to launch an assault on our outer perimeter." Kalen studied the map, his expression unreadable. The flickering light of the chandeliers cast long, dancing shadows across the sharp planes of his face. The Whispering Pass is treacherous in this season. A southern army is not acclimated to the altitude or the frost. "They are arrogant, my king," the tattooed woman sneered softly. They believe their numbers will insulate them from the winter. Luna stared at the cluster of banners at the Whispering Pass. A strange, vibrating clarity began to hum in her veins. For years, she had sat quietly in the background while her father and David reviewed security protocols and supply logistics. She had been invisible, but she had never been deaf. "They won't take the summit," Luna said. The words slipped out before she could stop them. The great hall fell into a silence so profound it was almost deafening. A dozen pairs of hardened, predatory eyes snapped to her. The tension spiked, a sudden, sharp pressure in the room. Betas and unranked wolves did not interrupt a war council, let alone newly arrived outsiders. Luna felt a flash of panic, the ingrained southern instinct to apologize and shrink away. But then she felt the heat radiating from Kalen beside her. He did not look at her with reprimand or surprise. He simply turned his head, giving her the floor. "You are not broken." His voice echoed in her memory. "You are forging a new blade." Luna took a breath, ignoring the racing of her heart, and placed her hand on the cold obsidian map. David's vanguard relies entirely on mechanized transport for their rations and heating fuel. Luna explained, her voice remarkably steady. She traced a path along the carved mountain range. The Silver Pine Pack discontinued their traditional winter foraging training 3 years ago to focus on urban combat. If they are staging at the Whispering Pass, they are bringing the heavy articulated trucks from Oakhaven. She looked up, meeting the eye of the scarred general. Those trucks cannot navigate the steep incline of the secondary ridge if the ice is thicker than 2 inches. And it is. "How can you be certain?" the tattooed general asked, her tone shifting from skeptical to fiercely curious. "Because my sister Elena insisted on reallocating the pack's winter preparedness budget to renovate the southern estates for the wedding," Luna revealed, a bitter edge catching in her throat. "They do not have the specialized tire chains or the cold weather lubricants required for a high-altitude climb. They are marching into the pass, assuming the main roads are clear." Kalen's lips curved into a faint, terrifying smile. "If the main roads are blocked, they will be forced onto the secondary ridge," Luna finished, her finger tapping the narrow, treacherous path on the map. "Their supply train will stall. Within 48 hours, the cold will do what an army cannot. They will freeze, and their morale will shatter, all without us spilling a single drop of northern blood." A low murmur of genuine appreciation rippled around the table. The scarred general let out a gruff laugh. A bloodless victory engineered by the bride they discarded. The ancestors have a wicked sense of humor. "Tactical team," Kalen ordered, his eyes never leaving Luna's face. "Trigger an avalanche at the mouth of the main road. Force them onto the ridge. We will let the mountain break their southern pride." Before the general could acknowledge the command, the heavy iron doors of the great hall groaned open. A perimeter scout, covered in fresh snow and breathing heavily, dropped to one knee. "My king," the scout gasped. "A convoy has bypassed the main army. 5 armored vehicles have just arrived at the iron gates. It is the Alpha of Silver Pine. He demands an immediate parley, or he swears he will signal his army to advance." Luna's breath caught. David was here. He did not come alone, the scout added, his eyes darting nervously toward Luna. He has brought his new Luna with him. If you felt the chill of the north and the heat of Luna's revenge, please leave a like. Share this story with fellow romance and drama lovers, and subscribe for more original, cinematic tales of heartbreak, power, and ultimate redemption.